I'm making a city builder. In the first devlog, I defined my game design pillars and created a simple prototype. It's been 3 months, so buckle up, there's a lot of new content in the game to talk about. I'm at the point where I need to decide, am I making a cozy game or a hard survival game? First, I want to thank everybody who commented and posted suggestions in the previous devlog. It's always welcomed and helps to steer the game in the right direction. So at the end of the previous devlog, I only had buildings that would generate money based on the surrounding tiles. Even for myself who made the game, it was confusing to know the effect of the building. So I added a white outline to show the effect range, with little resource pop-ups telling you the exact effect the building has on the tile. It will be easier for the player to understand and also easier for me to balance the game. To stop the snowballing of infinite money, I added a concept of civilians, requiring the player to have enough civilians to build extra buildings. I also added a water and food resource in a new UI. At this point, the building giving resources was all hard-coded directly in C++, making it not flexible at all. So I reworked it for a more data-driven approach. The buildings will have params to determine what resource and how much are given for each tile types, and the moment the resource tick. I created a new type of tick linked to the lifetime of the building, to create a house building that would give extra max civilians once. Those changes will help me quickly balance the buildings, and even allow me to create new building types without any new code. Which I did! I created a building that generates water from water tiles, and a building that generates food from grass tiles. With those in the game, I made it so that civilians would consume water and food over time without any consequence yet. To help the player start, I added a town center building that gives an initial production of money, food and water, and 3 civilians, but can only be built once. I coded a concept of building dependency and made the other buildings dependent of the town center, so that the player doesn't softlock themselves in a situation where they have no money and no production of money. I reworked the resource UI to add the number of civilians available, so that the player doesn't have to literally count how many buildings they currently have, with tooltips to help the player understand the icons. Adding new buildings was leading to a lot of monkey work in the UI, so I reworked the building selection UI to have a pre-made button that will auto-update based on their assigned building, allowing me to make them darker when dependencies aren't met, and have the price turn red when the player doesn't have enough money. To add life and personality, I wanted the civilians to be visible in the game, walking around and doing the work. Since the game is about building a city in the desert, I made the civilians' art as little desert people in a robe with a little scarf, kind of like the characters in Journey. The art is simple and gender neutral, saving me some time, since I won't have to make gender-based art for all future animations. To lay down the groundwork of civilians assigned to buildings, I created an info UI when buildings are selected, to have info on the selection, but also to be able to assign or unassign civilians to the building. For now, simply spawning them under the building. And buildings without a civilian assigned will no longer generate resources. Now it's time to make those civilians walk around. As few know, I used to spend my recreative coding time on an AI bot platform called Coding Game. The platform had many games that you would code an AI for, that would then battle other AIs and be ranked on a ladder. And what? I'm no longer top 100? Anyway, to be able to quickly code different pathfinding for the different games, I made a template for an A-star pathfinding algorithm, so it would be easy to tweak the AI no matter the game. So I unearthed this A-star template and made the civilians path on the tilemat grid, blocking the way on buildings, water and rocks, meaning that I still do not need any physics collisions in my game, as it will be managed directly in the pathfinding. Now civilians are spawned by the town center and houses, can wander around and walk to their assigned building. There's finally some life in my game. So it's time to add death! To finally have some constraints, civilians now die of starvation or thirst, when running out of food or water, and a new one will join once the situation is fixed. To add more personality to the civilians, I now give them a name, generated from a pool of first names and last names. They can be selected either by clicking them or through their assigned buildings. Since civilians can now die or join the city while the player is looking away, things can happen without the player noticing. So I created log events that would notify the player of events like a civilian dying or joining. At this point, gaining and losing food and water would happen at a slower tick than gaining money, and it was hard to tell when it would happen. So I decided to make a little animation of a sun and moon, so the player knows the time of day. Something that's been bothering me since I started making 2D in Unreal is that flipbook animations are only supported on actors and not UI, since Unreal has a dedicated animation system for UI. I've been planning to code my own flipbook widget for literal years, but I was afraid to even try, and it ended up taking me pretty much only an hour to do so. I just copied 99% of Unreal's flipbook component code, but swapped the part where it would change a sprite on an actor to changing the image in a widget. And bam, it worked on the first try. Hey, sometimes you spend days on a stupid, simple thing, and sometimes you get lucky and it's easier than you thought. In addition to the time of day, I also added variation numbers next to the food and water UI, so the player knows if they are in danger of losing some civilians. Buildings now need to be constructed before they can be operational. Civilians must physically reach the building for them to work the building, and I made a little construction animation. At this point of the development, I realized that something was problematic. All resources had infinite amount of it, infinite amount of money, food and water. So I needed a limited resource that would be used in limited situations, like a tech tree with upgrades. So the player has to make choices with the amount they have and seek out new sources to have more. The obvious choice was to make civilians mine rocks. A new type of buildings will make the civilian hit rock tiles with a pickaxe, destroy them, and gather a new type of resource called gems. I made a different version of my A-star algorithm just for mining. Something that people usually don't know about A-star is that it all works using two main values, a cost and a heuristic. Heuristic is a big word to basically say making a wild guess. Most people, me included, will simply make the heuristic to be how close is this position from the end position, which will be good enough when you simply want to find a path between two positions. In the mining case, I want to know the shortest path to any rock tile in range of the building. So I changed the heuristic to be how close am I of any of the rock tiles in range, and I reach my goal when I'm next to any of them, meaning that pathfinding not only finds a path, but also finds the closest tile to mine, and I don't even need to check if it's accessible, since the pathfinding will already do that for me. I've been procrastinating to fix the draw order, but with all the new buildings and civilian sprites, it was starting to be apparent. I dug up my draw order component I coded for my top-down test game, but mostly used in my game, auto-corrected. And everything is in order now. I thought the mining felt a bit too much like civilians were just destroying rocks, instead of gathering resources. So I added little gems popping out of the rocks, and pop-up text that would indicate to the player they gathered 5 gems, so it's clearer and more satisfying. Okay, so the goal was to make a tech tree, but I could not make any of the current buildings unlockables, cause the player needs them from the start, so I had to create new stuff to unlock. My first thought was an explorer building. Playing my own game, I would often spend money on useless buildings simply to reveal part of the fog of war. So this new building would allow to send a civilian to explore the fog of war. I made it so that buildings can open a contextual menu, allowing to spend money and water for the expedition. The civilian will keep exploring as long as they have water left to spend. I once again made a new alteration to my A-star pathfinding, where the civilian would find the closest fog of war position to them and to the explorer building, making them expand the fog of war around the building. Then some things easy to create were warehouse buildings that would increase the maximum amount of food, water, and money the player can have. At that point I had way too many buildings to have them all in my current UI, so I reworked it to have categories. I would spawn a stripe of UI when clicking on a category, populated from an array of buildings, so it will be easy to add more buildings in the future, without having to change the UI at all. Also, to make it simpler for the player, the game starts with only the town center in the UI, and it goes away once built, since you won't be able to build it again anyway. Okay, now that we have all of this, I can finally make the tech tree. First, I made a new building, the lab. Just like the explorer's hut, the lab gives access to a custom menu. In the tech tree, you can select to unlock the explorer building, the water, food, and money warehouse. And to test the dependencies between unlockable techs, I created an upgrade that allows the explorers to walk faster while exploring, which is dependent on having previously unlocked the explorer's hut. Civilians have a little animation with the lab coat when they are researching a tech, and I added a progress bar to buildings to see the progress of the research. I also reused it for buildings under construction. I also modified the UI to have a different state when the building is locked, so the player knows that they need a tech to unlock it. Also, I reused the log events to notify the player that the research has been completed. That's where I'm at with my game. There's now resources to manage and upgrades. Now, will it be a cozy or hard game? Well, at this point, with those cute little civilians chilling around, I guess I'm making a cozy... Wait, what? What is that? I'm currently working on sandstorms that make the desert move, forcing the player to fight the harsh desert environment. Stick around for the next devlog to see how I'll turn this cozy Citybuilder into a survival game.